See, we do not have standard definitions for what these things mean in the industry. I'm pretty sure there are people out there that everything that I said to describe enterprise information architecture, people think of it as data architecture. Let's just make sure that we level set, and when we use these terms, what they mean. Have a method to the madness. Don't just activate and go build, but take a moment to understand the end-to-end impact. It is going to pay off in the end. Transformation, more than anything else, it's about getting people to work together. It has so much to do with the culture. The technology part of it, that's there to enable it. But that people element and how we work with each other, which is the culture of the organization, in my mind, that's the most critical thing to make these things work.
Hi, this is Loris Morini, and you're listening to the Discovering Data podcast. We're here because we want to take responsibility for how data influences the world, and we want to enable individuals on our teams to achieve their highest potential. This show is for you if you want to understand the industry, find your tribe, and accelerate your growth. We bring you conversations with thought and practice leaders from all over the world, and create opportunities to connect and to learn as a community. Our new home is at discoveringdata.com, where you'll find a forum to connect with data leaders like you, episode transcripts, best quotes, and other material that can help you learn and apply your knowledge at work. If you have any feedback or ideas you'd like to share, please reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or Twitter. And now join me for this new episode. Let's stay curious and keep discovering data. So why are we sitting here? Why are we recording this episode? Well, the topic obviously is information architecture, but we have a bunch of questions. What is exactly information architecture? What is the difference between data and information architecture? How does it help data practitioners be strategic partners to the business? Does it help us achieve outcomes and more outcomes and less outputs? And most importantly, how does it fit into the bigger picture of data governance, data management? Like, do we need, are architects different types of people with different skill sets, or are these people sort of branching out from existing data governance initiatives? These are now a whole bunch of questions we'll try to answer today. My guest is Dora Boussias, business, data and technology leader. Dora is an expert in data analytics, enterprise architecture, and digital transformation. She works at the intersection between business and IT, and her job is to build relationships and balancing strategic and pragmatic needs to simplify processes, boost operational efficiency, and bring timely, relevant, high-quality data for the right business decisions. 4 adjectives that describe Dora and her leadership style, which really resonate with me, is authenticity, empathy, inclusion, and resilience. In the past 25 years, Dora has worked in various industries, from financial services to health and medical and retail, leaving a mark in global organizations such as Stryker, GE, and Prudential. So absolutely stoked to have you, Dora, on the podcast. Thanks for being with me today.
Loris, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
What is information architecture? How do you think about the role, and why do we need it?
Okay. Thanks for the question. So information architecture, and I want to differentiate a little bit from data architecture just so that I can zero in how I think of this differently. So it's really working with data, but it's typically enterprise information architecture. It's understanding the data first and foremost within the business context. It's not about the bits and the bytes. It's not about, the physical data models of an application. It's really understanding what the data means within business context, how is it used, and then looking always in an end-to-end flow of things, helping to some key goals of enterprise information architecture, for example, is how do we streamline those data flows end to end, right? What should be the authoritative source that we go get the data from, especially when we're talking about enterprise master data that has impact across many different processes and systems. It also looks at, that logical business information model. When I'm talking about a customer, what does that mean? What are the key data points, data attributes about a customer? and the relationships, right? Now, this is agnostic of anyone's system. So for me, enterprise information architecture, it's actually very key. And, I think of enterprise information architecture as the one side of the coin, data governance as the other side of the same coin. And they need to work very closely together. The way I'm thinking of a data architecture, again, it's more about the physical layer. It's more about writing the technical interface. It's more about, the data engineering part and the data, the physical aspects of the data, not so much the business context and where should we get it from? Why should it come from there? Who's using it? So hopefully that helps answer the question, Laurie.
Yeah, it does. I was actually trying, my way to understand this with just a quick browse on Wikipedia, and just the, first point of call when you're desperate. And there was something there that spoke about user experience and an active
Ah,
debate apparently in the industry where there's people that believe that user experience is part of it, and other people that think it's more about the system level kind of big picture without necessarily worrying about who's going to consume the product. How do you see this?
so yes, see, we do not have standard definitions for what these things mean in the industry. Even information architecture and data architecture, the way that I explained it, it's I'm pretty sure there are people out there that everything that I said to describe enterprise information architecture, people think of it as data architecture. So on that, I'm going to say what's really important is that within the groups, within our organizations that we work on, let's just make sure that we level set, and when we use these terms, what they mean. Now, if I go back to what you said, for example, you're looking at Wikipedia. Yes, information architecture in some circles refers actually to how to place things on a web page, for example. It has to do more with the user experience, but that's totally different. And yet, the term information architecture out there in the industry could be used to mean two totally different things. So when I'm saying enterprise information architecture or EIA, again, it's all about the data, the right data, the business context of it, what it means, working closely with the governance side, right? But information architecture, how you came across, it's more, to my understanding, I'm not an expert, but like you said, it's more about the UX and how can I make it a smooth user experience because I'm putting the right information in the right place where the eye will fall and they can easily get what they need out of that web
Yeah.
page, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah, yeah.
And that again, different than data architecture, at least to the way that I described it.
Yeah, and the common denominator here is perhaps, well, there's many, but one is strategy. The fact that we're trying to use these assets, information,
Mm,
and data being very intimately related, both intangible forms of assets to try and help the business do thrive, really, like reduce risk, improve efficiency, grow. So what is how does an enterprise or an organization come to the conclusion that they need to hire specifically information architects? What are the sort of problems that bubble up that are red flags to start hiring for these folks?
Typically, you have a need to focus more on that enterprise information architecture, the way I described it, when, for example, implementing big solutions and cross systems things break. Things break because sometimes what downstream expects from upstream is different. How they understand it, what upstream thinks they give to downstream is different than what downstream thinks they get from upstream. Again, not speaking the common language. Or when we're really trying to simplify and streamline
Yeah,
that end-to-end flow. See, a lot of what's happening right in organizations, I think it's still the case so often. We're very project minded. So we have a project, we have a scope, we do that, and we tend to forget, hey, 2, 3 steps down the flow of things. Someone actually might need data that I should be capturing now. Yeah, it's not in the scope, but they might need it. I may be capturing, for example, some information about a customer or about a supplier, and I absolutely capture the absolute, minimum what I need from me now. But when I'm looking at end-to-end flow, it could be another business process that outside of the scope of this implementation project, that really need data points. For example, shipping address, and I'm making this up, but just as an example,
Yeah.
shipping address maybe, hey, we're not capturing it. We're only capturing for this customer their name, maybe a billing address, some other informational shipping address, and we're not shipping them anything. We have to go through the order first. There's a whole lot of other things, invoicing happening, and then the time comes to ship product. And we then possibly find out, hey, I don't have a shipping address, or I have it in some cases, not in others, because it's not something that it's validated as part of process, right? So when I'm looking at the end-to-end flow of things, because I'm trying to understand the data within business context and within business process, the other focus from an enterprise information architecture perspective is to understand that, is there anything else that you could be capturing now? Or is what I'm capturing here right now, and the way we understand it within the scope of our project, is that how the downstream process of the downstream system also thinks about it? Because it's not just about us building it and then writing a technical interface to transfer the data, right? And then they get it in, but the name, the label might be the same, but what it really means and how the downstream process and the enabling technology for that process uses it is different. So again, from an EIA perspective, we really focus on try to understand the end-to-end impact of things.
Hmm.
While we're doing that, we're also trying to streamline the flow of things. So if I go from A to Z, if I can go A to Z, great. But I definitely want to avoid going A to B to C to D to E all the way to Z, right? And you
Indeed.
do not get that kind of understanding unless we take the time to really, for what we build right now, how does that fit in the ecosystem? And because otherwise things are getting developed piecemeal almost, right?
Yes.
And you just lose taking a step back. It's almost like you don't see the forest from the trees. You're
Yes.
looking at this tree and you're looking at this tree and you're looking at this tree, and you need to see the forest from the trees and see what's the right path to get to the other end of the forest, right? So those are key components of what an enterprise information architect will also be bringing to the table, highlighting and making sure that collaboratively with the business stakeholders and the technical stakeholders, we work to understand that, hey, what we're architecting here, that's going then to feed detailed design and build, is right, and considers that end-to-end picture and the downstream impacts.
Yeah, that's super cool. So you act as a almost a garbage collector for the technical audience that is familiar with programming, like tidying things up, ensuring that there's RAM resources available. I'm gonna stop speaking technical language now, otherwise we'll lose the 70% of our audience. But you do act as a sort of a glue, a bridge
Mhm.
between what's happening on in the real world and what's happening in the digital systems that are supposed to represent the real world accurately, so that you can use them to make predictions and operate. But sometimes they don't, not because people don't know that domain, because they do, but it's the end-to-end flow that matters as well. So stitching those domains together in a way that it's coherent is key as well. So what's hard about it?
What's hard about it? It's actually a hard skill set to have because it's a techno-functional role. Because you always have to be thinking about the business context of things. You have to be thinking about, hey, this data, how is it used within business process? Who are the business folks that are using it? For what purpose? We need to be asking these questions, right? And then the collaboration there with data governance teams, it's critical because from a process perspective, we need to understand it, but then what does that data mean? And do we speak the same language? This is where you have to work very closely with data governance, data stewardship type folks as well, right? That help drive some of those common definitions. What's hard is that you have to have technical skills. You need to, know how the systems work. You need to have enough technical chops that you can then, on one hand, talk to the technical implementation resources. But on the other hand, you talk to the business stakeholders. And even there, the other hard part about it is that in this type of a role, you always try to influence folks and how they think about it. Most of times, not always, and we're getting better at this, but most of times people are like, I don't care. This is what I'm measured on. This is my project. This is my scope. I don't care. I don't want anybody to break downstream, but sometimes folks don't think about it because the focus is what I need to deliver right here. I need to deploy this one system, right? And this is the 50 attributes that I need, right? And this is how my system understands them. Now, does the downstream system understand them the same way? Meaning the people using those systems within the business processes, we need to pay attention to that. Taking time, so that influencing of, okay, that's great, but we still need to understand how is this going to impact someone downstream. It's a link. It's a link in a bigger chain, right? If it doesn't link well, right, and if it doesn't play nicely with downstream, or if it doesn't take care to make sure that it provides downstream what downstream needs, because this is the place where we need to capture and provide it and validate it, then we need to take time to do that. And influencing people to think from that mindset and bring a little bit in there. We always want to also balance, right? And that's another big challenge. You want to balance hey, think of it from an enterprise perspective, because again, information architecture is really enterprise information architecture, EIA, right? So we want to balance thinking from the enterprise perspective with the needs right now, what we're trying to do right now. But you can't go to one extreme or the other, right? You can't only be thinking about end-to-end, because making all of that and making it perfect always, right, it will take too long, and people are just not going to go for it because we need to deliver. But on the other hand, just focusing on delivering this right here, right now, and not really thinking a little bit more, intentionally about how this fits into the rest of the ecosystem and what other business processes depend on it. And is there anything that we need to do? That's not good either. So we need to balance the two. And really, this is more about architecture. The other thing I would say too, sometimes folks think, we're going to build all of that. Well, not necessarily. It's kind of like when you're building a house, right? You need to know if you're going to be building a one-story ranch or a, 3-story home, 2-story home. How are you going to architect your foundation? How big, how strong is your foundation going to be? So we need to architect it for what we need now and later and what downstream needs, but then we can iterate through the build and keep on adding features, or build for this specific set of features, or in this specific area, because and especially when it comes to enterprise master data, because enterprise information architecture has a lot to do with enterprise master data as well. Remember, it's the other side of the coin with data governance, where again the focus is yes on all data, but predominantly enterprise master data, right? That has cross-wide impact. What do they say? The 20% with the 80% impact, or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. The
10,
most
20%, yeah.
critical, vital part of the data sets that you keep finding anywhere, everywhere across the enterprise. They keep bubbling
Yes.
up. They're like the center, the nexus of the graph. Um, I want to pick for just for a brief moment on this concept of enterprise information architecture. Do you think these principles apply outside the enterprise in practice, not just in principle? Do you see people worrying about the end-to-end impact of data solutions, products, however we want to call it, in smaller organizations, or this is a primarily something that is relevant for large beasts?
I think it's relevant for mid and large type. I mean, small depends how small, right? Obviously, the larger you are, the more impact, the more of those spaghetti diagrams that you see, because we're just keep on building piece by piece and not trying to streamline and simplify and really understand the end-to-end picture. Again, remember, one of the things I said is, how do I simplify flows? So to answer your question, I don't know that I have like a hard number. Hey, if you're over 50 people, you absolutely have to have it, right? I think it applies no matter the organization. You have to understand it. However, it gets to be a lot more complex and a lot harder when you're working in mid-size and large-size organizations, because we also always have to do with everything that has been built over the years. and all of the habits that have been put in practice over the years, because again, part of this role is influencing a little bit the mindset and finding a nice balance between what I need for now and what I, how does that fit with the
Yeah.
rest of the ecosystem, and can we balance it? So I want to say, when the organizations are larger, right, that's where I need the need is pretty big too. And in much smaller organizations, you might actually have folks that kind of do that because they understand it, and it's probably one person wearing many hats, and they know it is the one go-to person, right? When it's small organizations, now middle large size organizations, if we don't put the focus and have like an intentional law that takes care of that, then I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because when you have an intentional role, right, and it's something that it's recognized and it's part of the operating model, that means there are measurable goals. And typically, when that happens, the maturity of the organization is also such that the success criteria even for the program implementation, it's not only, hey, I'm going to implement whatever the system. It could be a CRM, it could be an ERP, it could be a smaller system, right? So the measurable objectives also might change, and it might, when you get to the maturity, might end up being not just implementing this, but make sure that actually, if I'm implementing an ERP, that hey, downstream, I, maybe maybe I'm implementing a commercial ERP, but downstream my territory management system is needing XYZ data to come from this ERP, so they know what kind of incentives they can, give to the salespeople. So that's success. Not only implement this system, but make sure that when you implement and when you give downstream, then my sales incentives, I have the data, they have the data that they need, and guess what? They expect the data from that ERP, right? So the success, how do you measure success, changes when you get to that level of maturity that you actually put focus on, hey, that end-to-end picture.
It's interesting because I was just thinking back to that remark that I made about small companies, small teams. For the folks that in the audience maybe come from a software development background that stumbled upon data, now they are, they're working as data engineers, data scientists sometimes, data analysts. And they're comfortable with developing software. There's a term that in software development we use to, I think, map something that gets really close to the definition you gave me at the beginning of information architecture, which is refactoring. Is about sort of stepping back from writing code and satisfying requirements for the right now, and seeing the big picture and how can we simplify, streamline, use one term as opposed to 5 different terms to mean the same thing. And that's something that's easy to measure because you see the impact of refactoring in code by looking at compilation time, response time of a function. There's really clear numbers associated, and most of the time this happens with automation. We work in integrated development environments, IDEs. They are designed to measure all these things. So as a software developer, when you refactor, when you simplify the flow, you know immediately if that was a good idea or not. But often, the motivation to do that work starts from yourself, your own frustration as a developer, because you're trying to build code and it keeps crashing, and after 2 hours of debugging you realize, okay, we need to rationalize this whole thing. This has become a mess. We have too many developers doing their thing, and now someone has to do the hard work. This is a long introduction for a question that I've been asking myself a lot. This is hard to do in software development when you have 4, 5, 6 people writing code. We still do it in open source projects contributed by thousands of people. So it's clearly something that we know how to scale in code development because of those tools and systems and automations we have. In the enterprise, when you're looking at so many different stakeholders, with different backgrounds. The sales team speaks sales language. They don't know how to write code. They don't care about a particular metric. They have an operational need and maybe a frustration on the field. that frustration needs to be communicated. Like, how many hops do we need to go through, and how accurate is the information flow in this sense?
So it's not easy, right? Another key point, I think, for enterprise information architects to be successful is that they need to understand the business. Obviously, you could focus on a domain. Let's say you could focus on the supplier space or the, manufacturing area where you're working a lot with different materials, right? Or in the commercial space, right? It's not like one person, the entire enterprise, right? However, there's a challenge there that you need to understand the business enough, right, in order to even be and have the expertise, have the technical expertise, have the right mindset and the right behaviors and the right skills, and communication plays a role. Again, like I was saying before, this is a techno-functional role, right? But you're working with the team, and it's part of the operating model. The thing is, no one always has all of the answers. No person has all of the answers. But how do you work with people to, even if it is asking the right questions that get people thinking so they can start understanding the impact, and then collaboratively you get to those right answers, better answers, that this is how we should architect it and do it. And hopefully that answers your question, if I understood it, Loris. But again,
Yeah, no, it does.
it's hard. Yes, it's hard. Especially, you could have an enterprise information architect working on more than one projects, right? You need to be a fast learner, I think, because it's not just about the technical, and it's not just about, bringing all of that expertise and doing the models and doing the flows. It's first and foremost, you have to be thinking about what is the business purpose here? Like, why is that data flowing from here to there? Should it flow from here to there? Who's going to use it? What do I need? You call it tomato, I call it tomato. Is it the same thing, right? You call it commodity code, I call it commodity category. Is it the same thing,
So there's a
right?
lot of
And
asking questions
oh
to, and
yeah,
challenging assumptions.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you could have, you could be an enterprise information architect working on an implementation of, I don't know, a PLM system, or a supplier management system, whatever it is, right? Okay, let's say supplier management. Sure, the more knowledge you have about that technology, whoever the vendor is, right? That's great, because you bring that in and you know how it works in there. But asking those right questions to get people thinking, and a lot of times to get to the right answers, you gotta get that information out of people's heads, and to also get them to start thinking about business process and dependencies, and who's going to use this data and for what purpose and why. And then, people have a tendency to just jump into technical implementations. People also have a tendency, when they're talking about end-to-end processes, to do it with a particular system in mind. And it's very hard to disconnect, but really, I sometimes say, if I had pen and paper, forget the system that you know. This is not us trying to fit our business into a particular technology. This is us really trying to understand, how do we want to manage our business? It's about supplier management, right? What do we need to know? What are those steps? How do we want to manage it, right? Let's figure that out. Let's understand the data. Then we'll figure out what is the right technology to bring in here.
Can you outsource this?
Or how we're going to configure the technology we have to actually the technology to fit our business, not the business to be forced into whatever any one technology solution does, right? Because at the end, whatever we do in this space, again, it's all a link of a bigger chain, and we need to make sure that it flows through, and we need to follow through that data, right? And I didn't say it before, but that's another thing. There is a little bit of the more technical aspects now of an enterprise information architect, meaning, hey, do I really need to replicate this data? Can I just do it? Because everybody has a tendency of just give me the data. And I'm trying to simplify flows, and I'm trying to not copy and replicate data all over the place. But in order to answer the question, do I really need to bring this data? You really need to understand, what data do I need? What for? What purpose, right? And those are hard questions to answer, especially because we've been so conditioned over the years to just say, I'm going to go implement the system. This is the data. Oh, somebody downstream is going to need it. Here, take it. But from an AIA perspective, well, no, I don't want to keep on copying data all over the place. I also don't want to replicate it unless I absolutely have to. So maybe then I'm bringing in the more technical aspects of it where, hey, I want a real-time view of that data and not just, batch ETL, bring into the other system. And oh, by the way, when it comes into the other system or when I want visibility to it, it's just visibility. I should only be reading, having visibility to that data. If it's enterprise master data, right? And we're working with our data governance friends here to really understand all of that and understanding within the business process, even if that data goes downstream, okay, that doesn't mean you can change it because it's enterprise master data. Because that's the other thing we do, right? We get it and downstream, we're making copies, then other people make modifications to it, and then we have multiple versions of the same thing, and we don't know what's the right version because again we haven't always we don't always take the time to really understand and say very intentionally, well, no, this is what this means, this is how we're going to use it. Sure, you need visibility to it, great, but you shouldn't be changing it. If you're changing it because you need something else, well, let's speak about what that is. Let's not override what is considered enterprise master data and
Because you don't want to mess with that.
you have a different version down there, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of a lot of the governance aspects of it come into play, but yes, it is hard, it is tough. You need to understand the business, you need to have technical chops and bring in the main to the conversation at the right time too.
Yeah. So I think the main aspects that I'm getting so far are enablement. So knowing who does what and how to make them more effective as a result of the job of simplifying and worrying about the end to end. The scope and range. So knowing about the business and the technology and be able to look at the bigger picture. And a ton of human people skills, communicating the needs and being persuasive enough so that people take action, because ultimately you're one person. I mean, how big is a team typically in a large enterprise that worries about architecting
Typically this is typically not a big team, right? And typically what you do is, I've seen it different ways in different organizations. Data from the perspective of, the information architecture, it's almost like an afterthought, right? We're always going to building the technology, data, and how do we manage it? Not process it through the pipelines, but really manage it. Manage it. That includes governance and information architecture and stewardship and quality and all of that other stuff, right? Privacy, all of that stuff, right? Everything that it takes to manage data. That's typically been an afterthought. Yeah, you know what? I wanted to actually double click a little bit on what you said about a ton of communication skills.
Yeah.
This is very important because you don't tell people, you need to influence people. So how you say, how you ask the questions, how you say it, when you say it, how you don't put people on the defensive, how, in a very collaborative and transparent manner you work together and you start bringing in value from what they see. This is why another reason why it's hard, back to your your previous question, how do you know all these things? Yeah, you really need to try hard to understand the business. And that's important because then you can get better examples to communicate, to articulate for something that what's in it for that person that you're talking to. Why should they work with you? Because, hey, maybe they're building something in here, but that downstream, maybe it's not them, but maybe it is. Maybe they're not thinking about, hey, analytics, what I need to do here in my whatever. We talked about supply management, for example. It could be the same type of leaders, same folks even that, especially the leadership perspective that, hey, there's another process. And yeah, maybe that's a different project and it's implementing something different. But how do we connect and make sure that we drive those synergies and make sure that they're not as disconnected as you think.
Yeah.
And what we do here will actually impact there. These things are just not, totally disconnected. Everything is interconnected in our organizations.
Yet in most large enterprises, it feels like you are in a little box. They slam a label on you. There's a job description. You do your job. You walk away, and sometimes feeling that the organization could do just as fine without you there. It's such a pity because we are indeed ultra connected. we are part of the same organization, so we have the same goals. So we should
Mhm.
feel that we are part of something bigger. But silos, cultural silos, the concept of you don't need to worry about that because your job is X. So worry about X. Here's your KPIs. We're gonna give you a nice promotion. At the end of the year, if you meet them all, it's 10% of your salary. Happy days, right? But that enforces a system where everybody just looks at their own feet and the half a meter around them. So sometimes I wonder, like, what kind of culture, what kind of incentives should we aim to put in place so that this whole job of connecting becomes easier, more efficient?
So, a couple of thoughts. You touched on a couple of things. Several years ago, I actually put together what I called an enterprise information management framework, an EIM framework. Another way to think about it, it's almost kind of like a framework for like a holistic data strategy, right? And you got different components. Enterprise information architecture, it's one of them, but then you have governance and stewardship, you have privacy, we have information governance, which has to do with records management, retention, and so forth. The say so there with security, right? Analytics, MDM, a few more things in there. I took this through the organization, right? It got established, but I had a series of town halls. I was speaking about it, and I had a footnote that I absolutely made it its own slide really big because I wanted to make this point. And the point was that none one of the pillars or components of this framework, it doesn't mean we're successfully managing our data. That framework was kind of like a bird's eye view, everything I need to really manage data as an asset, right? So what I
Yeah.
was trying to say is for really, really drive business outcomes, we need to work together. So the culture, it's a culture of collaboration, of partnerships, trusted partnerships, right? Collaboration, transparency, working together. And what happens when you get slowly to that maturity level, when you have the right folks driving things, right? Because another critical factor in making this whole thing work, in my mind, is having the right folks in the right roles, right? So when you have the right folks that can communicate it the right way, get the executive leadership support, because executive leadership, it's also one of those critical success factors, right? What happens is what I said earlier, that the measures change as well. There's a lot happening here. So success means that the entire thing works, not just this piece. So guys work together, figure out the dependencies. Those become measurable goals. And if that's what people are measured on, then we're getting away from what you were just saying, my measurement is to deliver this, right? So it's like the whole mindset, the whole ways of working and culture changes, and there's so many different aspects to this. But yeah, having the right folks to drive it, getting the top to be behind it, with the right investment going in, focusing on the people aspect of it and the
Yeah.
technology and the process, right? And just driving goals through the layers that, connect. Yeah, people can have their own individual goals, but they all, no matter where you're sitting, right? They all point back up to key strategic business objectives, right? Somehow they need to connect. Otherwise, we're going to keep on proliferating everybody thinking for their silo. And all I'm hearing about the last several years is organizations wanting to go through transformation, business transformation, digital transformation. The transformation, more than anything else, it's about getting people to work together. It has so much to do with the culture. And it's about changing how you do business every day and people do business every day. The technology part of it, that's there to enable it. It's a tool. But that human factor, that human element, that people element, and how we work with each other, which is the culture of the organization, in my mind, that's the most critical thing to make these things work.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, and I love, like, recently I tried to explain what do I mean when I think of, or I say data leader. Because discovering data is trying to be that connect, that bridge that brings us all together and makes us realize that we're actually very much similar instead of being different across all, virtually all data roles. I strongly believe that. And when I think about a data leader, I don't think about a software developer or a strategist or a consumer of the data, someone in procurement, in sales, in marketing. I think about them all, because to me, it's about, you're a data leader if you take responsibility, basically. If you say, I know that the data that comes in and out from my sphere of awareness is going to impact people and processes and the business, and this is going to happen inward and outward, upstream and downstream. And I resolve to take responsibility to try my best to make sure that both the incoming and outgoing are fit for purpose, whether I
Mhm.
know how to code or not. Because a lot of the time, it's not about implementing the change yourself. It's about explaining it in the right way to the right person so they can go and implement it. But if you don't have that storytelling piece and a culture where these people are receptive to that input is gonna die. Even if you tell the most amazing story, if those folks think this does not drive my KPI, I'm not gonna get paid more if I do this, it's gonna die there and then, right? And it's almost a web where every node, every hub of this network has to be connected, where the hubs are people and their intention of serving other people. It's almost a servant leadership kind of philosophy. And the spokes that connected are these communication lines, the storytelling, the people skills, the empathy that we need to be able to feel what it's like to be the person downstream. And imagine, like, I know this might sound like you know an idealistic view, but if we were to like for 1 second, like, wipe the
Mhm.
whiteboard and describe what such a system would look like. I mean, imagine the possibilities, right? Imagine working in an environment where you know that there's people backing you up all the time. No matter where you look, no matter which relationship you take into account, all the people that you interact with every day, they all think like you. They all want this to succeed. They all do it without focusing on their self interest first and realizing
Right.
that their best interest is only a consequence of the interest of the collective organization. And I would probably stop everything I'm doing and go and work for an organization like that.
If I may, Loris, right? Let me just say here what I'm thinking about a data leader. Even
Yeah,
if I
yeah.
just think about the two words data and leader, right? First of all, I'm gonna start with leader. Leader for me is, first of all, gotta be a business leader. You have to be thinking about what impact am I making for my business? Am I driving business outcomes, really, business results that make a difference? Yeah, I'm doing it with data, but is it actually helping my business, or am I just doing busy work, right? But also it's someone, again, right, skills for the right role, someone that, yes, can communicate, that can get the executives to understand this very complex thing about data and whatever that is, that it's so hard for folks to understand sometimes, right? So great communication skills, right? But not just for the executives, depending who you talk to. Clear. You obviously need to know your domain. You need, I think, to have good expertise in the data domain. Doesn't mean you know how to do everything, but that has to be, I think, your core domain to do a really good job. But it also means that you can drive change. You have to be resilient because the pushback is going to be there, especially when you're trying to drive a data strategy in an organization, medium or large organization, where people for decades have been used to doing things differently, and data was always an afterthought. So again, you gotta be a visionary that knows how to balance with what we need right now. You gotta be really good with prioritization because everybody wants better data.
Yeah.
So how do you prioritize
Another piece of
demands,
you.
right? You need to get that engagement at not just your very core team or the people you work with, but getting the organization engaged. Think about data literacy. That, in my mind, it's like a very key work stream, if you will, a key pillar as part of implementing a data strategy as a data leader, right? That means it touches many different people. So how do you get people behind this? Sure, you got the executives, but things don't work because, hey, I'm telling you to do like this, and an executive said to do it like this, because there's so many layers in the organization, and you need to work with these people. These people need to be engaged. They need to adapt this and work with you, not against you, as you're trying to drive implementing that data strategy, right? And
Which
it's
is
not an easy thing. The other thing I think we haven't really touched on is that this is not just something that happens overnight, right? Doing this, it's really a journey, as they say. You got to start at some point, but again, there's so much chaos sometimes, mess, not data mesh, but data mess. Data mess, and I'm saying with an accent too. There is like so much opportunity to better manage our data, right? This it's typically a multi-year, big program by the time you get to like keep on optimizing, right, and do even better with your data. It's a journey. But yeah, you need, as a data leader, you need the visionary that can get people engaged, can get executives back, can get all of these folks working, that can also execute. This is why I was saying, hey, you need to be able to prioritize. You need to be focused in your execution. You're a visionary that can lead and can execute. And there's so much into that. I mean, it's only 3 words, I think I said: visionary, lead, execute, and data. Okay, knowing about data, 4 words, but there's so much behind all of that. We can take each one of them and talk for a day for each word and what it means.
yeah. Um, cool. So let's do an experiment now. Let's imagine we do
Okay.
have that whiteboard that I mentioned at the beginning,
Okay.
and we were to step in an organization where the leadership is mature enough that they realize that they need to treat data and information as real corporate assets, not just as
Mm-hmm.
a byproduct. We have people on the ground that are frustrated, obviously, because things don't work, systems break, constant updates, external providers that are contracted to fix things, and they just make the system worse. So the whole thing is ripe for change. Everybody wants it. If you were to be hired to fix it, what would you do, and in what order?
Yeah, you do them in parallel. You don't just do data literacy first and then you go and implement governance and architecture or analytics, right? A lot of these things are happening in parallel. But what I would do is make sure that I work with the right executives, get that backing, because pushing this bottoms up only takes you so far. So you have to have that executive support, right? But to get that, maybe you need to show some quick value adding. You need to get people to understand. And sometimes, actually, typically, it's you start with like one big champion, like an executive that can understand. You show some value, and then more executives come behind it. I would do that. And once I got that and I got that conversation going, then being very focused, okay, what is my vision here? What is my mission? Out of everything that I can do, right? Again, when I'm thinking EIM, when I'm thinking just managing data as an asset, depending how big the scope of that data leader is, right? Are we talking governance and architecture and privacy and security and analytics and MDM? Are we talking only some of these things? So let's first understand what it is that's in scope of this leader. But then there I will try to figure out what's got the biggest business impact. And I would partner with my business stakeholders, right? To say, okay, what's got the biggest impact, and then how we're gonna start operationalizing, making progress. A little bit of progress in literacy, a little bit of progress in how we steward and govern data. A little bit of progress with MDM or quality. It really depends where the needs are, right? Because you might have data leaders that go into an organization and their focus it's all about information security, for example,
That's right. Yeah.
or just privacy and archiving and retention and records management, right? So it depends what it is that this leader is called for, unless you get somebody that just gets everything.
So it's almost like an equalizer, where
Yeah,
you equalize the response based on what the business needs, and so prioritize, but everything at the same time. You might put more weight on something
yes,
rather than something
yeah.
else, but you want to sort of less scope simultaneously trying to stimulate
Well, you
change.
can't boil the ocean. You have to prioritize. You've got to have a roadmap too, right? Because you got to show, okay, if I do this, what is the benefit this is going to bring us? Why should we focus on this first? It's got to be really good benefit, right? And it should be able to feed, okay, naturally I should do this first before I do this next part, but these couple of things can go in parallel, right? I think it's important to be very focused with what is the scope, what are the commitments, how do we stay very diligent now executing against those commitments and showing value, while we keep on driving things like data literacy and getting people, more and more people understand it. Because data literacy, I think, is a lot about getting folks to understand what this thing is. Why are we doing this governance and architecture and analytics? What is this? Why are we doing it? How do we get people engaged, the right folks, more folks? How do we make them be part of the solution? And because all of these folks, sooner or later, in some way, they're going to need to change how they work day to day. Because otherwise, if all of these people in the organization keep on doing what they've always been doing, we're never going to make progress towards better managing our data, which is what we're trying to do in this role and in this scope, right?
We are creatures of habit, right? So making that change is going to cost energy. I'm just thinking about the resistance and stories that might pop up in your mind from this 25 years that you spent doing this. When it comes
27,
to
actually. Yeah, I'm getting older.
27. Yeah. Time flies, man. I do have one last question for you because I'm conscious of your time. I already took more than an hour, but I'm thinking, what would you like to see less of in the industry as a whole, and what do we need more of? It's a complementary question.
What I'd love to see less of is just jumping into building things. Just thinking, I'd love to see less of thinking that technology is the answer to everything. There is no silver bullet. If technology was the silver bullet, we would have solved all of our problems. I'd like to see more an understanding about how important that human element is and the culture of how we work. I'd like to see more that end-to-end thinking. It's not just about building this, but end-to-end thinking, and think of that within business context. I'd love to see more of driving with not just in words, but really understanding, what are we trying to do here from a business? Let's say, we're trying to put a huge report out with KPIs. Okay, why those KPIs, right? Like, let's get to the bottom of it. And then we can find the right technology. So more people focus on culture focus, understanding that it's not the technology, but it does take all three: people, process, and technology. Less of jumping to build and more about think before you act.
Less reactive, more strategic.
Yeah. Have a method to the madness, if I were to put it in very simple words here. Don't just activate and go build, but take a moment to understand the end-to-end impact. It is going to pay off in the end. Because how many times we build things and 6 months, 8 months down the road, we realize, oh, that broke. Oh, we didn't catch that. Yeah, we didn't catch it, or we have to go and redesign because we never thought about the downstream impacts.
Or the thing, reality outside the walls of the organization changed, and now we need to change the systems. And so that flexibility and ability to respond to changes is also a consequence of that culture, of those incentives, of that interconnectedness between roles and the right roles, as you said.
Yeah, and what you just said with the changes out there, right? Or even as M&As are happening and we're getting new systems in your organizations to merge with us if we acquire them, or the market changing. Again, it's really doing it justice to think about that foundation, that architecture. And architecture, it's not the detailed design of, hey, I have this system with these lines and I'm going to write these interfaces. That, don't get me wrong, that's all very important, right? But let's just take a moment here first to think, hey, if I do this, what else depends on this? What else, where are we going? What's like the next phase of the program going for? Sometimes I come across instances where, okay, we have this multi-year program and we're starting and we're building everything for this phase. Let's say we go live in this one division and we're going to think about all of them. And we're not thinking about, the next phase, not from a build or a detailed design, but just from again, the end-to-end implications and dependencies, so that we can architect it right. Because if I architect and design and build something here now without thinking what I'm going to need 8 months from now, but I know something is coming, right? And I say, oh, I'm going to think about that then. We're going to miss something.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. So let's understand, where it's got an impact across the processes. Let's make sure that we understand that, we'll set it up right to begin with. And then, yeah, I can build for that division. I can build for the other division or business unit, or for the other set of
Yeah.
capabilities,
And it really,
iterate through build and keep on adding more functionality to it. But put a sound architecture that can actually scale and it can flex, because like you said, things are changing dynamically. If they're very, very tightly coupled, we're only going to start putting band-aids and, having a hard time maintaining it for the long term. We're going to have to re-engineer, re-architect, redesign.
well, the future is bright. I just read a recent post by Bill Schmarzer. He reposted on Data Science Central an article titled Six Steps to Becoming Value Obsessed, I believe, from Tom Davenport and Randy Bean.
Okay. I think
And
I saw it. I haven't read it yet, but yes, I did see the mention. I
yeah,
meant to
and
just go back.
virtually every metric of the six steps, are down when measured from a big survey this year compared to 2019. So it seems like we are slowing down as opposed to ramping back up. And so there's a lot of work to do, that's for sure. Dora, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Oh, LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So, and yes, anyone that wants to, I'm always open and approachable. And, I'm here to learn from each other. So I try to stay very active, especially in the LinkedIn community, because again, it's give and take, right? If some of the things that I say help someone, that's really what I want to do. That's great. But at the same time, I'm learning every day from all of my friends and colleagues on there. So LinkedIn is the way to get a hold of me.
Super resonates with me. I'd rather learn than be right. That's my tagline. And
Oh,
yeah,
virtual. I mean, always, always. I believe in always getting better at whatever it is, and learning more. And yes, I'm a
awesome.
huge learner.
Dora, thank you so much for your time. And I really look forward to many more, I think, of these conversations in the future in many different forms.
Lori, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, maybe we'll do it again sometime. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
All the best. Cool. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this episode. I hope this means you found the content useful and relevant. There is a lot happening right now over at Discovering Data. We're working on a new series of live events, more amazing guests, and we're starting to plant the seeds for a future conference. If you want to stay in the know, you have options. Hop on discoveringdata.com and subscribe to our list, or share your knowledge and make new friends by joining our circle. And that's all I've got for now. A big ciao from Sydney, Australia, and I'll see you in the next episode of Discovering Data.